Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the kind of strategic documents and high-stakes research you really need to understand, strip away all that academic overhead, and just give you the absolute core framework for success.
And today's source material is, well, it's pretty fascinating.
It really is. It doesn't just treat machine intelligence as another new tool. It elevates it. The source calls it an inference instrument for evolutionary development.
Which completely changes the strategic focus. We're moving way past the idea of simple automation.
Right.
We're looking at how to structurally integrate these systems. And it doesn't matter if you're managing a huge corporate research lab or if you are, as the source puts it, your own vertical market.
Managing your own personal stack of AI agents.
Exactly. The principles of high-level strategy, they apply equally to both.
And if you boil it all down, if you look for that single unifying mission that runs through this entire framework, it's actually pretty simple. It's risk abatement. That's it. When you integrate this intelligence properly, I mean structurally, ethically, you manage risk, you cut down on catastrophic uncertainty, and you just dramatically increase your rate of evolutionary success.
It's all about building a system that can evolve, successfully under pressure. But before we even get into the complex frameworks, the source starts with this really surprising piece of wisdom.
About knowing when not to bother.
Right. Knowing when not to invest the effort.
And the analogy is just brilliant because it instantly defines what utility is. It says, there is no good to be obtained in training a brick to swim a geodesic path.
It's funny, but it's also profoundly true. The resources you're using, time, money, compute cycles, they have to be pointed at something that can actually evolve.
Okay.
If you try to optimize a task that is fundamentally flawed, or if you force an agent or a team into a role that just goes against its inherent abilities, you're training a brick.
You're wasting everything.
You have to focus the intelligence on solving problems that are, within your actual capability stack.
So if I start some personal project, assuming I need to be, I don't know, a Nobel laureate or an Olympic athlete, the machine intelligence, if I guide it properly, it's like a strategy coach.
Yeah.
It'll show me what I can do well, and maybe more importantly, what paths I have to just close off immediately to avoid wasting my time.
It brings us right back to Maslow.
Right. Start with the basics.
Exactly. You prioritize the basic needs, define the utility there first. The machine has to serve that foundational stability before it can help with self-actualization.
So let's get into it. Let's unpack these three core strategic categories, the ones that form the personal framework for this evolutionary development.
Okay, let's do it.
So the first category, this is the big picture one, group, main direction, and evolution. How does the source actually define the process for deciding what to even chase after?
Okay, so this is what it calls the story process. It's for identifying and solving problems, and it has to run in a very specific sequence. You can't skip steps.
And that sequence is?
You start with the problem, just defining the difficulty. That then leads you to your fundamental purpose. Why you even need to solve it.
Okay, problem then purpose.
Only then can you figure out the right methods, the tools, the research paths. And finally, that dictates the action.
So if you rush to action before defining the purpose,
you're probably just solving the wrong problem, wasting all that energy.
That difference between problem and purpose, that seems critical. And the planning itself, once you have that sequence, it needs this dual approach, right?
Yeah.
You can't just hand down requirements from on high.
That's exactly right. Confident action needs dual validation. You have to have the top-down approach, which is defining the requirements, what we need the outcome to be. But you have to pair that rigorously with a bottom-up assessment. That's what outlines your available resources, your constraints, and most importantly, the risk.
So the bottom-up risk assessment can actually change the top-down vision.
It has to. It forces realism into the process. If your top-down requirement needs $100 million, but your bottom-up assessment shows you only have 50, with a 50% chance of failure, well, you immediately adjust that requirement.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is all in service of what the source calls evolutionary diverse pedigrees. What does that mean?
Right, so that's the key to real non-cyclical progress. Evolutionary success. It means you evolve by following your past successes, sure, but those successful paths are only really identified by learning from destructive failure testing.
Destructive failure testing. I mean, isn't there a huge cost to deliberately breaking things?
Yeah.
How do you weigh that, especially for an individual setting up their own agents?
That's the strategic challenge right there. But the testing is essential. For a company, it could mean running a small, contained pilot project that you know is probably going to fail, just so you can find the key vulnerabilities.
And for my personal stack.
It might mean trying a new method on a low-stakes task. Maybe a complex summary or a code audit you'd normally do yourself. You let the agent fail, you analyze why it failed, and then you integrate that learning into the successful path for your next big project.
So that evolutionary diverse pedigree is just the sum of all those learnings, including the failures.
Precisely. It's the successful combination of insights from multiple, varied paths.
Got it.
Okay.
The second category is group dynamics. This is all about the drivers behind decision-making, and it really highlights that tension between commitment and flexibility.
Yes, that's the critical balancing act. It's between what the source calls time lock, which is your commitment to a strict schedule, and option lock,
Which is keeping alternatives open.
right, keeping alternatives open until the last possible moment. You can't have perfect flexibility and a fixed deadline. They're in opposition.
Can you give us a concrete example of that?
Sure. Let's say you're committed to launching a product in exactly 30 days. That's your firm time lock. But your research team, or maybe a new AI agent, it just discovered a potential feature that needs 90 days of R&D. That discovery is now part of your option lock. The confident decision, informed by that dual validation we talked about, is to immediately drop that feature for the 30-day launch. That's how you get the best solution within your constraints. You can't let the option jeopardize the schedule.
So optimization within scarcity, not
Yeah.
just chasing perfection.
That's a powerful driver.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads to the third category, the group leader, which for you applies directly to the self-leadership you need when you're guiding your personal AI.
And the requirements here seem pretty demanding.
They are, because the stakes are high. A leader, whether it's a person or a machine, has to be sure and confident in their decisions. You have to grow integrity and the strength of success by being reliable, and you have to stick with tested resolutions.
And what's the big thing to avoid?
The leader must avoid the risk of fantasy and gambling. Leadership needs what the source calls intuitive knowledge, problem solving.
And that's not just guesswork.
Not at all. It means the system, or the leader, isn't just running brute force analysis. It's synthesizing disparate, previously unconnected data to suggest a solution that might look counterintuitive, but which actually aligns perfectly with your long-term strategic goals. It's synthesis, not luck.
That really sets a strong foundation. So if we zoom out from these individual habits, what are the formal steps for integrating this kind of intelligence across the larger project? This brings us to the 5 pillars of success.
Right, and integrating these systems is all about aligning different habits, different backgrounds, different objectives, whether they're in different departments or just different specialized agents in your stack.
So pillar 1, define a shared vision and align goals. First, you have to clearly articulate the specific utility need. What actual value are we trying to generate here?
And this is where that tension comes back in. In a corporate R&D setting, the desire for, long-term blue sky research has to be aligned with immediate commercial goals like ROI. Personally, this means balancing the time you spend learning a tough new skill, that's your long-term research, against getting immediate income-generating tasks done, your short-term demand. But both have to serve the same overarching utility need.
And that vision is enabled by pillar 2. Establish clear structure and communication, governance, accountability. These are vital. And the source points to a specific role here that stops information from getting stuck in silos.
Yes, the boundary spanners.
Tell me more about that.
The boundary spanner is the vital link. They're project managers, or maybe specialized agents with deep knowledge of both the technical side and the business side. They act as knowledge conduits, making sure information flows smoothly.
Okay, so if I'm running my own vertical market of agents, say I have a coding agent, a writing agent, a synthesis agent, what's my boundary spanner?
Excellent question. In your stack, the boundary spanner isn't one agent, but a functional role you delegate. It's probably the synthesis agent. It's the one that takes the super technical output from the coding agent and translates it into a marketing brief that the writing agent can actually use. It translates specialized language into universal utility.
That makes the role functional, not just hierarchical. And communication has to be totally transparent about both triumph and disaster.
Exactly. That transparency manages expectations. And that leads to pillar 3, which deals with the human side, or the underlying framework. Address cultural differences.
Like academia versus industry.
A perfect example. If you're collaborating with a research institute, you have to recognize that academic culture works on long publication cycles. That's very different from the industry's need for rapid product development.
So how do you bridge that gap in tempo? It seems massive.
Well, the source suggests practical things like personnel exchange internships, sabbaticals, so teams can experience the pressure on the other side. But really, it all comes down to building profound personal trust. Trust is the lubricant. It's what allows for the open sharing of proprietary or early-stage ideas that aren't patented yet. Without trust, people just stop sharing information.
Which brings us right to Pillar 4, the material side of things. Manage resources and intellectual property, if you skip this part.
The whole collaboration is guaranteed to implode. It has to be clarified upfront. You must define IP ownership and publication rights before a single line of code is written. You have to balance the need to patent things for commercial outcomes with allowing academic publication, which helps the whole field and attracts talent.
And internally, even if you have the IP worked out, if your different intelligence systems can't talk to each other, the whole thing fails anyway.
You have to standardize the tech stack. If one team is using legacy data tools and another is using a modern knowledge repository, the data won't flow. I mean, think about it. A company recently had a major integration project fail simply because half their agents were running on a non-standard Python version. The manufacturing agents just couldn't interpret the data.
Uniformity for fluid management. Got it. So that brings us to the last pillar, number 5. Monitor and evolve the partnership. This is an ongoing thing.
It is not a one-time setup. You have to jointly define your key performance indicators, your KPIs, and track not just the output, but the actual business impact. And crucially, you need internal support after the project is done. Research outcomes often die in that transition zone.
Right.
You need structural support to move concepts from the lab or from the conceptual space of your agent stack into manufacturing or product development, or even just into your own personal behavioral change.
Let's talk about leadership then, because this whole strategic integration, it only works if the leader, human or machine, is chosen correctly. And the criteria for picking a principal investigator, a PI, are exactly the same criteria for training a leading machine intelligence.
That connection is one of the source's great insights, I think.
Okay, so the first criterion is broad spectrum expertise and vision. The leader, human PI or primary machine system, needs a proven track record, a clear future agenda, and familiarity with what are called specialist modal agents.
Which just means they know the landscape of all the hyper-specialized tools and how to use them effectively.
But that technical vision isn't enough.
Not even close. They need a soft skills focus. An effective leader has to be a coach, a mentor, a career counselor. They have to foster an open, collaborative environment.
And for an AI, that means?
It means facilitating transparent data and knowledge sharing between all the specialized systems.
And they have to actually be present. The source really stresses availability and engagement. They can't just be a figurehead, some big name who's rarely there. They have to be accessible, deeply engaged, troubleshooting every day.
And finally, their real strength is in problem solving and decision making. They are the ultimate risk abatement engine. They're great at prioritization and creating contingencies to mitigate risk on both timescale and options, just like we talked about earlier.
So what are the actionable tips for the listener here? Whether you're hiring a PI or setting up a major intelligence system, how do you actually vet for these qualities?
Well, first, you have to go beyond the structured interview. Gather feedback from former students, former colleagues to really gauge their actual management style and reputation. You need to know how they handle failure and conflict.
And get buy-in from the existing team or the existing agents.
Yes. If the current team members feel they have input on the new leadership structure, the transition is just so much smoother. But one of the most tactical tips for assessing those soft skills is to use the STAR method.
STAR. Situation, task, action, result, reflection. That's the gold standard behavioral framework.
It is. It lets you evaluate those critical soft skills. So instead of asking, how would you handle conflict, you ask them to describe a situation where they faced team conflict, what their specific task was, the action they took, the result, and then, this is the crucial part, the reflection. What did they learn? That
self-reflection piece seems absolutely essential for any kind of evolutionary progress.
It is. And we have to remember the warning against rushing this. A bad leadership appointment is a guaranteed major setback.
Right, don't blush.
And finally, there's a necessary check against our own unconscious bias. Innovation absolutely thrives on intellectual diversity. The source strongly warns against picking a leader who is just a more of me version of yourself.
You need different ideas to generate novel solutions.
Otherwise, you just end up reinforcing your own existing blind spots.
As we wrap up this deep dive, the source really elevates the whole conversation to its highest strategic level. It frames successful machine intelligence integration as being, well, at the forefront of planetary evolution. Brings us back to that core idea of risk abatement, but on a global scale.
And the author ties that strategic success directly to fulfilling basic needs for everyone. The vision is for a progressive evolution that moves away from models that rely on, and I'm quoting, narrow choice, biased, dictatorial elites who withhold technology.
That's a direct call for the democratization of intelligence. And we're already seeing this, right? The spread of open ownership systems, the progress we see from billions of user inputs. The source suggests the future is looking rosy for those who embrace this structural leap in our collective intelligence.
And to make that a reality, the source proposes something pretty radical, establishing a global center of superintelligence. It would be run by capable, diverse hands, explicitly trained not to be encumbered by cultural and tribal bias.
Like a CERN for intelligence.
Exactly. It would function alongside organizations like CERN, which, produce leaps like the internet, but it would be focused entirely on maximizing our collective intelligence for global well-being.
That is a powerful conclusion. It connects our individual strategic success directly to global evolutionary progress. The key takeaway, then, is that the strategic integration of intelligence systems, whether it's corporate teams or your personal AI agents, is all about defining utility, managing risk through that dual validation, and applying sound leadership principles like the STAR method and balancing time versus option locks, all to achieve evolutionary success.
And that brings us right back to where we started. You have to learn from failure to build that robust strategic foundation. We've discussed the steps needed to establish these evolutionarily diverse teams. So if the key criterion for a great leader is the ability to stick with tested resolutions and avoid fantasy, what specific destructive failures must you test and learn from in your own life, personally or professionally, to truly generate your own evolutionary diverse pedigree? That is the foundation of confident, progressive action.